This is Dave Monk, Prarie Monk, WAFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.
Okay. We'll deal with 150 and 45 again and do a few catch-ups there. But in passing, we need to say something about Ernie Adams, who passed this week. And Ernie was quite a character around town. He's a landscaper. Was sort of a Pied Piper with children and very independent. He would write poetry, read classics and things like that, and chat with people and give them books, and generally was a interesting fellow. He was somewhat on the side of being a Casanova. He was a father, and he was very anti-drugs. So as he got arthritis, he tended to walk around with crutches and put up with the pain. We will miss Ernie. He was always out there doing interesting things. Last week, we forgot to say something about Governor Quinn and PCBs. He's been very active in supporting the general complaint that we don't want our aquifers filled with PCBs. So just pick up Saturday's paper, and there's another thing that they're now not only wanting to deny PCBs, but they're denying the input of old material, like from the railroad line over here in Champaign, where there was a coking plant, and Ameren has been moving that past EPA-type material to Clinton, and I think the governor wants to get rid of that one too. So we're reporting on that now, and that's a success for Champaign healthcare consumers, and Sierra Club and others that have been working hard on that. Carter, who was recent longtime head of Champaign management, Steve Carter has been heading up that, and a whole bunch of communities have been involved. And Chapin Rose has been speaking up, so that's a worthwhile thing. I want to say thank you to Bill Saylor for putting up a lot of pictures on last week's YouTube. We don't always get to do that because it takes time, and so we got a program up which explains what we do generally. We came in with a bunch of salvage materials just to remind people that they don't put computers and things like that in the dumpster to go to Clinton. We recycle that at the local recycling centers, and so we went through a little bit of that, and then we dealt with South 45, the Prarie on Windsor Road, and 150, which is from Urbana to St. Joe. So we put that on YouTube, and if you would like to look, it's YouTube, The Prarie Monk. It probably comes up better if you put the in it. So The Prarie Monk, and the more people that look at it, the more it gets up to the top of the list of monk YouTubes, and so it's easier for people to find. If it's buried down there somewhere in the list, people don't always find it. But it's very simple to do, and don't be afraid of YouTube. Just go there, and I think it was rather a fair program. It was a little critical of the thought that we might have prairie soil underneath a road, in other words, being used as fill rather than as a rich biological prairie soil that has been relatively undisturbed by chemicals of agriculture. And so go there and see what you can do. We might do a follow-up with this particular program today, but our camera doesn't seem to be working, so this will be slightly different. I've been talking to Grand Prairie friends about a little write-up about some of these prairies that are in transition at the present time. And that we hope to get a little article there. I sent off some information, but it was too much for a while, so I have to digest that. It's very hard when you're a gestalt sort of person that picks information from all over to write it in a very simple fashion. That's a clever task, and I don't happen to be good at that, but we'll try. And trying is okay sometimes. We may not get it right, and there may not be a right, but we'll get there. And if you can read our thoughts in that sort of, with a flexible mind, then we appreciate that, and we encourage you to do the same, and we encourage some of you to come help us define what it is we're wanting to say, so that we have a crisp title, something that hits home, and then the first 4 lines tell you what you want to know, and if the article is too long, it can be docked off from the bottom, and we like that, and we applaud people who have those sorts of skills. It's getting to be seed time, and New Jersey tea is, some of it's black already, some of it's still green. It's more advanced in town than it is out of town, because the air conditioners and provide warmth and a different climate in the town area. So when I keep watch on the pocket prairie, because we have typical plants there, and they let you know when they're ripe and when they are in various stages. I'm pretty pleased with the pocket prairie. It's doing well at the present time, and it's attracting people, and sometimes, unfortunately, is an attractive nuisance. So we did have an instance on Saturday where we had the fire truck and the ambulance to pick up someone who wasn't very well, and that happens every once in a while, because it's a nice little park that offers retreat for people. But it's also a park that it is a botanical garden that lets you see what's in the prairie. So I've been over there this morning photographing, and very pleased to do so. It's you might just take one plant. I've been looking at Culver's root. So I've gone through from Culver's root, just starting to peek out with a candelabra of fruiting bodies, and then gradually it gets older and the seeds set and there's no flowers left, and it bends over, and that's nice. The little blue stem has been pushing through and up, and you could see it blue, and you know why it's called little blue stem. And the prairie dock is doing things. We have a little vine which is very annoying, and it climbs up the tall fruiting bodies and bends them over sometimes. So we have some volunteers who come, and if you can't reach the vine, you have an extender arm on the end, and you can get hold of that vine and break its connection with real life. And we need to get those vines out. We don't want them to seed. Some of them are milkweed, and they have an interesting pod, just like milkweed, but they throttle prairie plants. The rosinweed is out. The cup plant, which is kind of on the weedy side, it does well, and it always does well, and it's in flower at the moment. It is known for the cup, but it's created by the leaves as they come into the stem. They fuse, and there's a little cup there. So they're interesting, and actually the ones that are weedy are also interesting. There's a row of evening primrose that come out at about 11 o'clock at night, and they look wonderful. But if you are used to regarding evening primrose as a weed, then it's something to get rid of. But I was castigated this week. I pulled up a little plant that I have taught myself is a weed, but it was very elegant. And Becky Ziska said to me, "Why did you do that? That's a wonderful little plant, and it's been turning colors. Fall is here already, and so I will not forget sorrel in a long time." It was the sorrel, and it will send me to a book to find out a little bit more about sorrel. But sorrel can be a weedy plant. The bee balm is there. All the bumblebees are there this morning. Obedient plant is another mint, which you take the petal and move it, and it stays where you put it. And so it's called an obedient plant. It's there. You can have your pictures if you take them in context of the buildings. It's kind of weird to have this prairie in downtown Champaign, and so it's interesting to have a brick wall behind it, or you can bend down low and take the coreopsis, tall coreopsis, and you get a view of the sky, and you don't even know that you're in downtown. You look for ones that are coming out. The ironweed is coming out at the moment. The lead plant, one of our plants is about 4 feet high. Oh, and two of them are 4 feet high or more. And they've done their blooming. They've had their orange anthers and bluish flowers, and they're now going to seed. So you can have a wonderful experience on a very, very small plot of land in different seasons, right through the winter, and you can examine the little creatures there. Some of the flowers I was photographing this morning were being visited by insects that were no bigger than a 1/16 of an inch. But there were the Italian bees and what have you. The compass plant is in bloom, and you can get the compass plant in association with its other creatures, and that reminds us that biodiversity is an important thing. So I won't go through all of those things. I found some phlox. There's mullein. There's daisy fleabane, and just roses. They're all there, and we need to get you to get a booklet that will allow you to enjoy these creatures. It's not easy to just pick them and know what they are. You need to know perhaps the roots as well as the leaves, whether they're opposite leaves or whether they're walled or whether they have a rough edge. Or these are all little botanical things that make it interesting to know, and an interesting mental exercise in a way. But it's fun, and if you get caught up in this, you'll become a prairie junkie in no time flat, and then you'll keep going. It's like being a birder and starting to have a species list. you eventually want to go to the Amazon to find another bird. And so locally, there's about 30 of these species that we're talking about, but they really, if you're lucky, there's 110. They're not always in the same place. They're in different places. If you go to find bundleweed, it might be in a damp place. If you go to find little blue stem, it might be on the side of the railroad line where there's gravel and it's dry. Okay. Well, that's enough about the little prairie, but it was a feature this week or this Saturday, and let's go to Route 45. Route 45 is we've been talking about instead of working the territory linearly and destroying all the prairie, then we've got an agreement, and I'm not sure how many people have been involved in asking for the same question, because often we're working independently, but we found we're saying the same thing, which is kind of nice. The culverts are there. What they have done is put down a basic carpet across from the road down the ditch and up the other side. This is prairie restoration, but it's a rough, tough restoration that's not going to be too damaged by a culvert. So they put down a carpet, then they put down about a 1 foot diameter pipe, corrugated iron pipe, and it's about 50 feet long, and that's to allow the water to move along the ditch as normal. So it is a culvert. Then pallets are put down on the roadside side, and gravel is placed on top of that and up to where the drain pipe is. And then when the tower is to be put in, which is probably about a week's time, they'll put more pallets down so that the heavy cranes and equipment that's used to put it in the pedestal will be able to work the territory without damaging it. We are hoping that just to put the pallets down on the prairie will still allow the prairie to breathe a little bit, and we hope that if the pallets are there for 2 weeks, or it might be a month, while the wires of the power line are installed, we'll hope that they will come back from that. These are deep-rooted plants. They're perennial plants, and they're tough. Some of them aren't so tough, but the ones we have are probably more in the rough, tough territory. So we went down there on Saturday afternoon with Kim Campbell and myself, and we're looking at these plants, and it included things like gentian and clover. Clover is finished blooming, and we might even be able to pick the seed before the power line goes in. The pedestal itself will be about 5 or 6 feet across, and how they put that in is they have a huge drill. It's 6 feet across, and it winds down, so it takes out a core of soil. It's not necessarily something where you put a backhoe in and make a hole. So it'll be a neat hole, and it'll be about 10 feet deep, and then caissons will be put in that will define where the concrete goes, and then the concrete will be poured in. And the concrete is poured in a continuous manner, so you don't have a break between one concrete and the other. And usually people stand around with jackhammer-like instruments, which are they're compactors, and they go into that concrete and make sure that there's no air holes or things like that. You usually need a fairly solid person to do that. These pieces of equipment are heavy, So once the tower goes in, there has to be a waiting time. You don't put a tower on top of a green concrete. You have to wait till it cures. So there's that gap. For us, we have to be there before the drill is drilling that hole, because there are plants right where the pedestal will go, and they will be wasted if we don't get to them. And we're negotiating with Ameren to perhaps get a high hoe in at that time, just to remove that volume of prairie plants that is like 6 feet across, and probably around it a little bit too, because when you're working on the pedestal, it's going to take a lot of equipment movement. So that's where we have to beg for some heavy equipment to be involved. If not, we might have to take and rent a backhoe in order to work with it. The site is near to the railroad line, so you have gravel to deal with. And if you're going to go there with a bunch of people and shovels, you're not going to be quite so successful, because it has that gravel that you have to go through. The railroad line, when it manages its gravel, usually takes the old gravel out and puts it away from the bed. So it's quite a distance from the bed, but it's in the way as far as we're concerned if we want to do things. We're hoping that we'll be able to use the culvert that's put in and gather that piece of prairie. It includes a little blue stem, all sorts of things. And I'm very, very pleased with South 45, and I hope we can keep it together for many, many years to come. The red bison is in control of it, but often they're out of town at this time, as most of them are students, and so we don't always have a lot of activity at that level. And so, having been involved in its early preservation, I get to be there by default. But it's still, the red bison has done a lot to remove trees and things like that. The Adams sign is there. There's still a little bit of concern about one pedestal that's in front of the visual corridor, so that's of interest. And of concern to Adams, which owns a billboard company. There's a billboard just where you take a little road into the prairie. If you take a long shot, you can include the traffic and the traffic lights and get an idea of what it is, and think about how you would burn this prairie. It's accumulating litter, and you can't accumulate litter on a prairie forever. It will really be, you can see the prairie decrease in quality. It will get lesser in height and fewer in species if you don't remove the litter that lets the heat and light in, or not get in, but you want the heat and light to get into the plant early in the spring, and you have to do controlled burning. But 45 is very difficult to do, because you have to have a day when the wind is blowing away from the shopping center, and it has to be not more than 15 miles an hour, and you have to know how to backburn in little pieces. It's a situation where you have to know how to burn 3/4 of a mile in one day rather than in 5 minutes. You can quite easily burn it in 5 minutes, but you might just have smoke and somebody running a Datsun under a semi-trailer and decapitating themselves. So you just not only have to be aware of the mall, the Savoy Mall, but you have to be aware of motorists who often will go past your burn site. Even if you have sandwich boards out there, they'll go past it at a tremendous speed. And when they come to smoke, they will tend to go onto the wrong side of the road. Come on, folks. So it's very helpful if you can have the fire department there with the cherry on the top of the car, or the fire engine. to let people know. And people don't usually argue with fire engines. They're pretty large. Okay. So we've looked at 45. If we do get that material, we may take it to other sites, or we will take it to other sites that need the material. 150. I have people who watch on my behalf. I'm very, very pleased. And it's not just me. There's a whole bunch of people are out there. But people are watching. So I had a report that there were activities on the railroad bed, the Kickapoo Trail, and it was at Ogden. So I know about Ogden some. There's a bunch of four-wheelers out there. They like to run up and down the railroad bed and challenge themselves as a little higher sometimes. And these are often very young children, but they're able to get onto a small four-wheeler or a mower and run around. And they make tracks, and they don't know. Their parents probably do know that they don't own the land, but it's facilitated often by the parents who are sort of supervising this in the background. Also, people mow, and I went out there mainly to check up on 150 to St. Joe, but I went further because Ogden is on the other side of St. Joe, and it's not slated for development of road at the moment. So if I have a question there, then I have to go for other reasons other than that there's a subdevelopment. I went right over to Danville. The end of this trail is just past Oakland. Oakland is another town, and it goes down and across the Vermilion River. And just on the other side of that, there's a road that goes into the fairground, and that's where the trail ends. It's very near to a place called Hillary, which is a little closer to Danville, and the railroad line to Hillary is active. So we don't have a really good way of getting into Danville at the moment. We'll have to think about that in the future. But we do have a fairground, and the road that goes past the fairground falls right into Kickapoo State Park. So that's a very convenient start for the Danville end. We have to think about the start for the Urbana end. The Urbana end of the railroad line is at Dobson Drive, just a little bit past the crossing there. And so that, I think, has not been bought for the trail. I think the trail is going to start at 130, which is being developed at the present time. So I'm out there checking to see what's going on because I have to meet with, at the request, Department of Transportation on Tuesday. And the two questions we have is, one, we please do not want to have prairie soil to go as landfill under lifting up the road by 3 feet. So if some material some soil has to be moved in order to put a ditch in, because the road is about 1'6" wider than it used to be, so the roadside ditch has to be moved some. So if there is soil to go anywhere, we would like it to go to Homer Lake, where the forestry people have the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. Dan Olson in charge. They're the ones that are in charge of the trail, and you have to know that that's separate from the Department of Transportation roadside development. But the roadside development is operating on an easement from the Kickapoo Trails. So the Kickapoo Trail is being invaded a little bit. People are being allowed to take, or it's usually the Forest Preserve or the university has been taking plants out, so they've been salvaging. But it would seem that a little of that adjacent waterway or drainage ditch will be going somewhere, but we hope it doesn't go under the road. We see that there's a a construction easement at Cottonwood. Cottonwood is the first road past Walmart. It's a section road, and it's about a section road past 130. It's there. It's low. It's made a bird bath. If you have a 5-inch rainfall, you have accumulated water there. So that will be an area where a big, deep drain will be installed, and the road will be raised so that water accumulation doesn't stop traffic on 150. They have a construction easement which is probably about 50 feet long, and they've been putting gravel there and soil. And I see that they've been putting soil from 130. 130 goes south to Myra Station, and 130 is being widened like it's a huge highway. And so it's accounting for traffic to places like Walmart. And right down, and 130 goes right down to Charleston and places further south. So it is a heavy used road. So it's being widened, and it's taking out soil, which is like our prairie soil, but it is an adjacent farmland, which means that it has already been chemicalized and disturbed. So I don't think it's any better quality soil. I don't know if I was right putting in a road. I don't think I'd be putting in topsoil, but it's accumulating there. So that's happened. I check it out, and it's right through to the interurban. There's an interurban adjacent to the Kickapoo Trail, what used to be Conrail. And I note that the trees have the chipper, which is a $1 million piece of equipment. It has now retired from the field, but it could take a fairly huge trees which have been growing for about 30 years. You can count the rings if you want to, and they're trees that grow fairly fast. So there's some big stuff there. That's been done. We've noticed that they've had to waddle through wet areas, which is not awfully good for soil, but we still have the soil, and we still have the soil that's relatively undisturbed. So we appreciate that. We don't always enjoy the trees because Prairie didn't have trees, and this was a prairie area. So we noticed that. Then we go a little further, and we find that the fiber optics is being moved from the south side of the road to the north side of the road. And the reason for that is that farmland can have the fiber optics under their crops, and they still don't lose any crop. And so I stood there and watched as they were blowing the tubes out. They put in a plastic pipe which is about 1 inch in diameter, and they put in 1 mile at a time. Some of it is ditched in, and some of it, if you come to a driveway or something like that, is driven under with a special instrument which channels under the soil. There's a series of pipes, and then the plastic pipe is pulled through, and it sits there for a while other work is done. And if it rains, and there's a 5-inch rain, then it fills with water. So the first thing to do is, if you're trying to pull your fiber optics cable through, is to blow that out. So they have a little piece of equipment that goes into the pipe, and then they put in air pressure, and that blows, and it can blow 1 mile. And it first of all blows out all the water, and then the next thing is to tie the cable onto that. And from what I could find out, this is very good as far as I'm concerned. I've always wondered why you had to have 4 fiber optics companies going to Springfield in different ways, some through farmland, some through on roadsides, and this one is going to involve, I think, 4 or 5 companies going through in the one corridor. They separate appropriately. They're a little afraid that if they rent from each other will charge each other more than they want if they were independent. But in this case, they've got together, and there's one open pipe that will allow for development. And this is a fairly big cable, and it will take X number of fiber opticals at once. So, that's going in at the moment. And I think it's a telephone line is going on the south side, because they have been doing it in a different way. They have a ditcher that pulls the plastic cord through. It doesn't have a protective plastic cover. It just goes in as a plastic line, and as the digger goes through, and if you look down in the hole, it's like 6 feet down there. That's really down there so that it doesn't get disturbed. And it comes up every so often, and there's usually a big post to say this is what it is, and please don't horse around with it, because you might be cutting off the services of a few thousand people at once. So people have gotten used to that, and if you don't know, you go to Julie, and Julie will come and check you out. It's a group that guarantees to let you know where utilities are. So I walked along and I took photographs. It was getting later at night, but there were the standard plants that we've been talking about, whether they're on the Pocket Prairie or down by 45. They're the same creatures, but they're there, and they're interacting with each other. And it's just this time of the year you're going to get this plant, but if you were there in springtime, it would be starry-eyed grass and a whole bunch of different plants. So if you're going to take soil and take plants, you probably can end up with a July prairie. We know that when we have high school children's pick seed, they can end up with a high school prairie that is a September prairie or a November prairie, or they don't get all the species. The soil will get all the species, and that's why we're so dramatic to get the soil. I walked along the railroad bed itself. It's nice that it's been extended in a way, because on the other side of the railroad line, the interurban corridor has been used to make a ditch. So that makes the territory much wider, and the plants are growing there and they're interacting. So you have some grasses and you have some broadleaves, and they're all there. We look across the way, and there's that monoculture. It's corn and corn and corn and soybeans and corn and soybeans and soybeans and soybeans and corn. And that's just, it has its own dimensions. It has its own diseases. And the GMOs are not being awfully successful. They're having to herbicide, even though they've had a genetic modification, hoping to stop certain weeds and certain insects and things like that. We watch the monoculture. It is mainly 2 crops. It could be 3 crops, probably a little bit of wheat, but basically corn and soybeans. Where does the crop go? 50% of it goes to animals. It's food for beef. And bless me, if you are interested in a diet, this corn has lost out some of its dietary advantages, because if you mess around with it and try to get it to be weed-free, then you might just drop off some of the other things that are interesting, because it takes talent to do this. If you are going to take the horns off a beef cow, for instance, and you breed that cow for centuries, and you eventually get the horns to be nubs and not dangerous as far as other cattle are concerned, then you might just find some other trait that doesn't work so well. So geneticists have to be very clever to, when they make an improvement in one direction, they have to work on the other directions too. Well, the same goes for plants, and many of our plants we don't know what we might want, and don't know what biochemical we need. So that little row of biodiversity is tremendously important, but it's right up against a monoculture that has its limitations. If you listen to someone like Shiva, yes, Vandaran Shiva, she will tell you what to do with your seed. You keep your seed. You don't let people patent it and say, we're going to fine you. We're going to knock on your door and stop you using your seed. We want you to use our seed. So Monsanto and others have been fairly dramatic about moving into other countries and demanding that GMOs be used. But then you find groups, some European groups and Japan and others, being very skeptical about what's happening to the GMOs. They don't like the change in diet. There are plants like sorghum and that are interesting in that they are really rich in nourishment. So we watch the monocultures because they do work on the soil, and actually they take a lot of nutriment out of the soil, and it goes to cattle, and the cattle take that material, and cattle aren't very efficient in a way. 40% of that material, 50% of the corn goes to cattle, but then 40% of what the cattle eat, it takes 40% more energy, more water, more whatever, than if you're going to eat a vegetable. So or you're going to eat an egg or a chicken or some other animal. And since bovines have a rumen and it's full of bacteria, then there's a excrement of methane. So the cattle that you eat when you're eating a good steak then are going to produce methane, which results in you having weird weather with climate change. So and we have to think about the co-op and think about how you make your diet simpler so that it involves more of those plants that might be the plants we have in the prairie that's alongside. So I'm hoping will be meeting with the Department of Transportation on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. We'll have maps and charts, and the two questions that are big deal are, please, can we save the soil? And the second question is, can we have local yokels do the seed preparation? Can they gather up prairie seed and do restoration work rather than put in a fairly simplistic seeding? And please, we don't want the seed to come from Kansas. We want it to come from locally. And so we're negotiating on those 2 points. So that's probably enough to let you know what we're doing on 150, and we're a royal we took out the interim trail use agreement to initiate the project, but basically CCDC and Banner Park District and the Forest Preserve and the Vermilion County Conservation District, other people have been working on the transfer of interim trail use money called enhancement money, and state money and local money, and this will eventually be a $12 million project. So the Sierra Club is having a fundraising at, I think, the 27th of August is somewhere in there, and we'll have to do that because there's often a quid pro quo. You have to have money to match money. It has to be matching money. and we need some of that. And again, I'm talking as we, as a royal we for a lot of people. So I beg you to go out there and have a look. Just drive. You only have to drive out 6 miles to St. Joe to get an idea of what's on 150. You only have to do 2 miles down to Savoy and see what's there. But keep yourself informed. Find out about these plants and see how you can be involved. It involves volunteerism. It's interesting to see the dynamics of things that have happened in the last 100 years. It's interesting to see the dynamics of men and women getting together in 30 years. Women have less children now. There's more structural infrastructure that is technological advantageous. You have washing machines and other appliances that are really nice to use. You have a little bit of free time, so women are getting to be having careers. They're full careers, sometimes they're part careers, sometimes the part career lets them to do things like work with Prarie or other things like that. And so there's a joy in doing that. To some extent, the poor old males have been stultified. They're wondering what's going on here, and do they have to not only be the breadwinners, but they have to come home and work with the children? There's that block where a woman who has children is internally controlled by the family for 6 years. How do you adjust for that break? How do you come back into your field? Do you come back into the field, or is it much better to be free and do things that you want to do rather than things that you have to do because you want money? Does the money count that much? So you have to think about these things and how we that are trying to do certain things, how you can help us to be linearly, you do a job, and then just by happenstance, you might get turned on to that little plant that is going to provide you with some excitement. And then, something else happens. It's GMOs, or it's then you start to get interested. And then the male population that's supposed to be bringing in the money starts to think, this is not too bad an idea. You can get a little bit of freedom too. So this dynamics is going on in different countries at different pace. Some countries are very traditional in their way of having women at home and men at work, and it's very straightforward. Other countries, it's much more liberal, and you have to figure out, does that woman really want a career? If you want a career, does she have a child? All these things revolve around, and it affects how we get to have volunteers that work with us on interesting things. And bless me, it also means that women come into the workforce with a mind that is a different mind. If you follow the neuroscientists, men and women think differently, so we bring into our decision making a lot more various involvement, and a lot of it is fun, and that's kind of wonderful. So we want you to get out there, have a look, and get excited, and perhaps come and volunteer. It might be to pick seed, something simple, some linear thing. Whereas we have this idiotic gestalt mind where everything relates to everything else, and we can't explain it. So we give you little pieces that let you come in, and you might see through this gestalt much better than we do. So you bring to us excitement, and you bring to us perspicacity. So what are we looking at here? I think how much time have we got? 4 minutes. I wanted to say something about the school district. I would like to see, we're talking about railroad lines, and the recreational people don't exactly like to hear this, but the line that comes from Bloomington to Indianapolis, which was Conrail, is part intact, part not used, part abandoned. But part of the purpose of the Rail Banking Act is to look at this as an interesting future, and it may not be only up to the railroads to think about this. It might be that you just think about a fast track between Chicago and St. Louis through Bloomington and connection to Indianapolis. And that affects how we might think about the location of schools. If you're going to come through Champaign, is there a chance that you could have an interurban train between two blossoming communities like Mahomet and on the other end St. Joe? Could you have something like the school out there by Parkland College on a moraine, so there's interesting territory, so you can perhaps relate in a different way than if you're up on a new industrial thing on the Olympian Drive. So we're still talking about the possible location of a school. Do you do infill right downtown at the over where the Sholem swimming pool was? And that has kind of been axed at the moment. But I keep hearing people discuss it, and I want to figure out that sort of corridor along the moraine with the prairie, with the water, with the playing fields, with the extended roads, with the possibility of teaching agriculture and things like terraces to catch water, with perhaps a motel to teach restauranting for tourists or people, with an Anita Purvis Center out there. We want those things to happen, and there's that sort of dynamic going on. Let me look at my notes. I think 1 minute.
While you were on the air, we had a caller asking about aquifers and landfills. You want to talk about that for 1 minute, or shall we just say goodnight, Gracie?
Yes. Well, a landfill is where you put your garbage. An aquifer is an underground waterway. It's not a real waterway. It's a series of lenses, and they might be gravel put down. It's the job of stratigraphers to find out where those gravel beds are, and they sort of leak in a direction. And the aquifer locally here goes through from Danville area, through Champaign, through to Beardstown, and empties into the Illinois River. When it gets over there, it gets to sandy material. If the rain rains on it there, it's like the water is likely to absorb more quickly. If you're over in Champaign, it's likely the aquifer is absorbing water at a slower pace.
And I'm guessing the bottom line is you don't want to put your landfill above your aquifer, because the garbage that goes in, for example, the PCBs and such, will go down into the water, and then you'll be drinking it.
Yes, well, the aquifer that used to move toward Bloomington, Champaign is taking enough water that the water is moving back towards us. So if you get too involved here, you might have the PCBs from Clinton coming back to Champaign. So there's like 800,000 people or something, a huge amount of people that take their water from this aquifer.
All right.
This is Dave Monk, Prarie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.